Hey everyone, welcome to episode 4.
I gotta sneeze.
Is this... Bless you.
Sorry. Okay.
Is this episode 4?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 4. In the last video, we were starting to talk about Emily's system and some of the things she was learning about her system, and we're going to continue that today. There's a lot of detail in this video, so...
All right, we're getting into the meat and potatoes.
There it is, yep, the meat and potatoes.
And I'm going to make it as simple to digest as possible. So I just want to start off with a little bit of background information about how alters are formed. So essentially, children rely on caregivers for attachment and attunement, which is as necessary for them as food and water and like shelter, right? So this is like I don't know why we're in cooking metaphors, but this is the bread and butter for children, right? Is like having attachment with whatever their guardian is. When you have repeated trauma from a really young age, the alters are created to preserve attachment with the caregiver. If they have an attachment figure that is both dangerous but also necessary, they tend to have something called disorganized attachment, which means that essentially they need to both go to and away from the caregiver at different times, depending upon what the caregiver is doing. So, as traumas are continuing, basically the child is required to access this alter, this state of consciousness, to get through that event, but still preserve the attachment. And it gets basically repetitively used until this part of the child's brain is preserved, is like preserved in the situation, sort of. And that's just like an overview. So typically DID systems have sort of predictable parts and like roles. Not every single system is going to have every single role. It's really just based on what the person's brain perceived them to need in the moments of trauma. Some basic alter roles would be like protector. So you have like a primary protector, an emotional protector. So like every time, let's say a parent was emotionally abusive, you're going to have an emotional protector, sort of. Like it kind of depends on what was happening. So basically at this time, I was tracking who everybody was. So we knew about, it was literally like 10 parts from the beginning, okay? And at this point, I was just like trying to track who was who and what, like when they were coming up and what was going on, because that was a lot. That was already a lot for me. Like that was hard. We worked together as a system to try and create images for every single alter, like how they felt about themselves. I wanted to let them express this so that they could have their own like individual stake in like who we were. Cassie was still CB at the time.
OCB.
So, and also, I think I said this last time, but basically CB was like our other main day-to-day host, meaning like that was in front the most, like interacting with the world the most at the time. So we have littles, we had sexual protector.
What's a little?
A little is basically like a young aged alter that is expressed through the system like a child. So for us, you know, we had Bunny. I think I talked about that a little bit, but she was like 4.5 and like likes pink and hearts and rainbows and ice cream, sprinkles, whatever. So, and I actually had a bunny.
Just go get her real quick.
Okay. All right. So I never got rid of her. And she's just precious. I probably never will get rid of her. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, I came to realize like their names, like they would just kind of tell me their names in my head randomly out of nowhere. And it was like, I just all of a sudden understood, oh, they're telling me that their name is whatever.
She doesn't go by Bunny anymore.
No, she changed it because she wanted a big girl name. Yep. So she became Bailey, which she picked too. Basically, you can see that like all the alters in the system are somewhat similar, I guess, to how we perceived ourselves at each of the times when I think kind of the traumas were going on. But I'm going to get to the point where I really started to understand my system, but it took months to get into a point where I really got more information about it. Just to go down the timeline, now we're up until about July of 2023. So I went and looked, but that was the last session with the first therapist who I felt like just couldn't validate that I knew I had DID. And so I was like, I mean, we kind of agreed that maybe I needed a different approach. I needed to go somewhere else. I needed to find someone else. And I ended up finding a DID specialist. And then I had a whole insurance battle trying to get our insurance to cover sessions with her, and they didn't. And so then we realized that we were going to have to pay for it. At that point, I was just like, I want to know what someone who looks at this disorder every single day thinks about me. Like, yeah. I want them to tell me what they think, because at that point I was just like...
Well, you were struggling in that, you know, as we've learned most systems do, struggle with acceptance of it, right? So you're like going through this back and forth, and so you're like, I just want to talk to somebody who knows about this.
And so during this time, I got really close with someone who, like, was probably one of my first friends on TikTok, on DID TikTok. And this was like someone who, I think they were one of the first people who ever was just really kind and nice to me and talked to me. I ended up really getting close to them. They really helped me see my next big thing that was like really big for me, which was that our system was based on a type of abuse called RAMCOA. And I'm going to kind of dig that up now. So before we get into RAMCOA, I'm going to go ahead and put a serious trigger warning. I just need everybody to kind of monitor their own feelings when watching this information, because there is really dangerous things that can happen to systems who are from this kind of a background, where they will need to harm themselves when hearing more and understanding more about this information if they haven't prepared themselves. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a trigger warning. Like, if you, while watching this, start to feel negative, other than just, obviously you're listening, this is kind of intense, but like, if you feel any negative way towards yourself, or stop watching it, seek help, remove yourself from it. So this other system knew that they were a RAMCOA system. So RAMCOA stands for Ritual Abuse, Mind Control, Organized Abuse. Okay, RAMCOA. Ritual abuse is essentially abuse that occurs on a schedule that is determined by certain dates and holidays. It's a very specific and looks and leads the system to be a very kind of specific way. And so one of the main parts of the acronym is torture-based mind control. Okay? And so essentially it's similar to Pavlov's dog conditioning, and I know that I'm not like a technical scientist on any of this information. I know what I have come to understand through researching and talking to other systems who are also RAMCOA systems, other DID systems who have experienced similar themed abuse and trauma that I have. And it's really interesting because basically a lot of the systems who are from this type of a background have similar features. And I'm going to get into all of this, basically. Not all of it, but enough for it to be helpful if anybody else who's watching this feels like they could maybe like benefit from understanding it.
It's repeated in a specific way, and so you have the characteristics of a RAMCOA system because of the way that the abuse was
perpetrated.
It was ritualistic, right?
That's right. And so, not just ritualistic as in it was the same acts. So typically ritual abuse is based on some sort of religious background. So even if I guess it originated from satanic ritual abuse, that was like SRA, was like this panic thing that came into more public awareness in the 80s, I think, and 90s. And so essentially somehow these satanic cults were permeating into and becoming Christian like cults. It was like reversed almost. Like the Christian people were being, it's like Christianity was a stand-in for Satan. Like it was literally everything was pretending to be Christian. And I think essentially like people who were involved in this did not know that it came from SRA, satanic ritual abuse. Like, so they had this whole calendar of basically dates when they would do specific acts and perpetrate certain things to have a specific outcome for the people, for the children who were involved. And this is like frequently in cults, essentially, but it also can be passed down intrafamilially, meaning that through families it's passed down. And that's just like one aspect of RAMCOA, is that it's generational. And typically involves as well racism. It like started within like kind of more wealthy families and lineages who had power. They had white supremacy. It's basically, honestly, male-driven power, sort of. Okay, so one night I sat down after having battled with the idea that maybe we had programming, which is related to torture-based mind control and ritual abuse. Programming is essentially that someone uses torture to get a specific behavior
from their victim, right?
Yeah, so they want a specific outcome to be conditioned to the point where they don't have to apply the original form of torture to get the same result.
Yeah, they're trying to implement some kind of trigger to get you to comply for what they want.
Yes, and typically they are doing an act that is bringing your brain and your body to such a high state of dissociation that is essentially creating alters they provide a function. This is what this alter does. Okay, so one night I sat down and I had spoken with my friend. I was trying to get my head around the idea that maybe we had RAMCOA-based trauma, because what was kind of unfortunate is even at this point, I still really hadn't processed very much of my trauma at all. I was simply watching myself on a day-to-day basis to try and figure out what my system was like, who I was. I started Googling my family history. So I started looking at, my dad had always spoken of his family in a very prestigious manner, which I never really understood because I didn't really know my family. I didn't know my grandfather. I didn't know either of my grandfathers. Both of them had passed away before I was born, I think. I never met them. And then my grandmothers also passed away not too long after. I think it was age like 20-ish. Both of them within a few years passed away. So I started looking into my family history. I started researching my dad's family, because if I was a part of a RAMCOA family line, which is what I was starting to really think, it was kind of essential that I started to know more about my family, like his family. So I ended up finding basically that they were one of the first families to come over from England, I think, to Virginia, which is where I was born. That's where his family was. It's actually also where they went for me to be born, which I think is actually still interesting, and I don't really understand what was going on with that. Part of me wonders if that meant something or what. He was also running away from the fact that the church knew his behaviors, so maybe it was just that. It was just a way to escape that whole situation. Whatever. Anyways, yeah, so I started to see, first of all, I knew my dad's family was racist. He was racist. He tried not to act racist, but he was. And I always would be really, really angry about it. Yeah, just looking up that they basically had a plantation home. They had slaves. My dad was definitely very heavy on pushing religion onto me, amongst other gaslighting and other things that he was doing, just making me feel generally like I was the problem with not having connection with God, despite me being dedicated to trying to do better, because all I wanted to do was make him happy. Yeah. I was like starting to see that all of these things were lining up with typical RAMCOA style abuse. And I was like, oh my God, I think I have to accept this. Like, so much like me accepting my diagnosis of having DID, it really took a lot of convincing and like digging to get me to accept that basically I was probably a RAMCOA system, which means that just the way that my system looked, the way that the trauma had been for me was probably really intense. Because at this point I really didn't have any trauma like that I knew of. Like I didn't know specifically what had happened.
I think characteristics of RAMCOA probably need to be discussed.
Yeah. So I started to get really close to other RAMCOA creators in the TikTok community, because there's like a whole subsection of systems who are really well informed about this and try to explain it to other people and They provide resources that are free that you can just go on their link trees and just like look at whatever. One of the things was a book called Becoming Yourself, which I downloaded for free. And I started reading that. But that book really digs into some of the characteristics of RAMCOA systems. One of the main things being that RAMCOA systems look not like a DID system. So they're very well hidden, and it's very difficult for the person to recognize, even more so than normal DID systems, that they have DID. And so basically they present to therapists very, very covertly. And like it's very common that these therapists are not able to identify that this person has DID, which was why even more important for me to have stood up for myself, because I did fall into that like weird section of systems that were harder to identify. Essentially, the structure of a RAMCOA system is basically typically they have a shell alter. So they have an alter that's closest to the outside world who essentially is a mask for all the alters, so that they are very difficult to detect the differences, both vocally, like to the alters themselves as well as everyone. So literally it's meant to be hidden so that it protects the integrity of the abusive people. So literally everything about RAMCOA is a secret. You're basically a chainless slave, which there's a specific document talking about that as well. So you are a servant to the person who creates your system. And it's for the purpose of them using you for whatever they need. And in my case, I was used for profit and sexual favors, I guess, or trafficking. So as I started to work with the idea of RAMCOA, I started reading this book. I went to my DID therapist for a little while. She confirmed that I did in fact have DID based on all my symptoms. And it turns out that I found out later down the road that she has worked with other systems who have programming, but we'll get there. I couldn't afford to keep going there I think I went for like 3 months, and then it was starting to get around Christmas time. So from August until around November, I went to therapy once every other week, I think. And it was really helpful, and I felt really safe with this therapist. Like, I love her. Like, she's amazing. She makes me feel really good. So anyways, I couldn't keep going there. And so this is when my friendship with this other system really like took off. This other system really stepped up and basically kind of became a therapist for a minute there. Honestly, I felt like they understood me. I mean, obviously we went through a lot of similar trauma, and like was able to really basically related with me about RAMCOA, about how our systems functioned, how they looked, how they were. And I just started going to them like on a daily basis, just being like, what did you do with this? Did you have this? Did this happen to you? Blah, blah, blah. And I kind of was like, I'm frustrated because I can't pay for therapy and I'm giving up on it and it's all basically effed. Like, I was just like kind of, I guess, disheartened by not being able to pay for it. And they were like, don't give up. Keep looking for a therapist, as well as they started she was like very, very, very analytical and really good at breaking apart how my symptoms were, like, and then why I was behaving the way I was, and like kind of giving me insight in how to bridge that healing process really like effectively and quickly. Like, I could bring anything to them and it would be like boom, bam, here. And I'd be like, oh my God, like, how did you just give me all of that information? Like, you don't even know everything about it. And it was because I think, like, their pattern recognition was, like, just really good.
He, had been going to therapy longer than you, so she kind of had, she'd been through these types of things.
Definitely.
And so she definitely kind of helped walk you through a lot of these things and understanding. And so when you would go to her and say, hey, I think I have this, like, memory or this issue or whatever it was, she was able to sit there with you, and really help you through that. And it was huge.
It was, and it was like to the point where I just wanted to be that person for other people. Like, it was like in those times whenever I literally so desperately just needed somebody to understand what the F was happening inside my mind that even I couldn't understand, she was doing it, right? Like, they were doing it. And then I was like, this is insane. Like, I have to be able to do this for other people too. So time goes by. I'm going to reference a specific article that really helped me understand another reason why I was like, yeah, this was programming. Like, this is what I have been suffering with forever, including the phobia, like all of it. It just like, I was like, okay. And then even Josh too, I showed you that article, programming, how it shows up in daily life, right? And we were both just like he couldn't even like function after reading that for a while. Like he was like, I'm not okay. Like, I'm not okay.
Yeah, I was like, because I didn't really want to accept that, like, not only did you have DID, but you also had this extremely religiously
True.
Programmed type of system. And I was like, it was, at that point, it was just so much for me that I was like, it's like, how do we know these things, you know? And then, yeah, I mean, obviously reading through, you know, the details on it, it was like, it's finally explained so many aspects of what you had gone through, and who you were. Yeah, I was like, I remember reading through it, and I was like, yeah, I think I just need to, like, process this for a little while, like,
yeah,
let's talk about this in, like, a day or two. I don't know. It's like the first time I wasn't just like, let's talk about it right now. I was like, I need to, like, sit with this for a minute, because it was so intense.
Yeah. And eventually you got your own therapist, because it was too much for any human being to ever have to process alone. Anyways, I basically switched positions at my job because I was a case manager at the time, and I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this stuff in my life while also doing something important at my job, because also I was being a mom during the day to a less than 2-year-old and Mila, who was 4, and then so I would be doing that all day, and then right when Josh would come home from work, he would take over and be dad at night, and I would be worker at night. So I would go to my job. I was just like, dude, I can't balance all of this stuff. Plus, I am a circus act. So I would really like to not be a circus act in front of other people at my job. So I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to do this easier position. And luckily, I was at a job that was so accommodating that they were like, oh, you are struggling? We'll just change everything so that you can function. And I was like, why is this job so perfect? Like, what is wrong with you people? Whatever. Anyways. And wrong in the best possible way, right? Nothing was wrong with them. I was like, yes. So anyways, and not only that, but it was a bump in pay. So now I was able to afford therapy, which I had been trying to gain access to for months. So in April, I started, and this is this past April. So now we're almost caught up to now. I started going to therapy again with the same lady.
Just to clarify, when you changed positions at your job, you went from night, where you were doing like 4 hours a night, to daytime, where you're doing 6 hours.
That's right.
So that's where the bump in pay technically comes from, right? Is that you're
more
doing more
hours. It was more hours, more days a week, because I wasn't working Friday nights. So
24.
basically, I became the behavioral health tech. So just like the tech position, which is like much mentally easier. Like, there was almost no mental strain. Didn't really require a whole lot of like emotional bandwidth. You know, it was less pressure, I guess. So I was in this easier position. Now my kids could go to school, like the baby could go to, he had been bored out of his mind anyways. We were like, okay, cool, now he can go to like his little daycare school place that our other 2 kids had been able to go to because we could afford it. So it was like, everything was like, yes.
You've been working with this other system.
I had been working with this other system, realizing that I need to go back to my therapist. I finally have the pay. I started doing that. And there was also another series I'm going to put up here that was on that system's link tree. Like, one of their things that they talked about was the survivorship series. If anybody's interested, it was really helpful actually too. And I would like go for walks and listen to the whole thing. I started to really see how the structure of my system was. Finally. It had taken me 2 years of deconstructing and understanding so much. And like, honestly, I had processed a lot of memories with my friend system. Like, they had sat with me through basically homemade EMDR. Like they kind of just had done EMDR themselves with therapists, and they were just kind of letting me go through, and this is over the phone, mind you. So this person is like insanely selfless to me. Like I'm like they're just like, they really care. So I just, yeah. They kind of like, we went through different memories. Basically, once I had gotten it down to, I could kind of do it myself as well, and I did that for a minute too. So I processed so much trauma at that point. Like I'd say in 2 months, I processed like probably 10-ish different whole segments of trauma from different subsystems. So basically, in my system, we have systems that are separated from each other. And all of this is for the function of keeping the alters doing their jobs that they were tortured into doing, right? So the whole structure is basically tiered. So here's the top. You've got Emily at the top. The world sees Emily, right? This is our first mask. Then you get to the next level and it's like Cassie. So CB. So that's why we were having this kind of switch between these two parts was the most, that's what it felt like to me the most, but I never understood why. And so what it is all these, I'll go to the next level, would be the other alters in the system. So we have basically 3 other subsystems of parts that all go by the same name in each one. Until I like, if I sit with and process the traumas of each part, then I'm able to really identify who they are separately from the main base name that each one is. Okay? So you're looking at a structured system, which this is how RAMCOA systems frequently are structured. There's gatekeepers that stand at the top and don't allow basically the memories that formed the systems to go through the amnesia. So that basically I never knew why the alters in my system were doing what they were doing. And it was to protect the abuser. Technical AF, right?
No, it's really well said. So now you've decided, you've processed a lot of these traumas, right? Memories. You're identifying your system really well at this point. Like we've got a really good definition finally.
Yeah, because I had been struggling with it since the beginning, because that was like my first task. Like when I made the pictures of everyone at the beginning, I was trying to do that then. And I'm going to even show right now, just as a reference, there was literally 2 different versions of Hayden that we created, our protector, because there was more than just that, actually. The reality was it was a subsystem filled with parts who all went under the same alias as Hayden, essentially.
Yep. It's insane. So you go back to your therapist.
I go back to my therapist.
Yep, trying to keep us on track here, but that was really great.
I started to, essentially what I had to do was break programs by going into the alter that's isolated at the very, very bottom of the subsystem, and debunk the lies that were told to them. And so the way it's created too is that all these parts underneath, right? There's amnesia between those parts and the day-to-day parts, okay? And so the parts that are driving my behaviors, I don't have connection with. They don't have connection with my current reality. They only have connection with what they knew that they would be punished if they didn't follow through on their jobs, whatever their jobs are. Which was determined not by me, but by my dad or any other people who he allowed to program me. And then, like, you can see the age is changing because, like, the lowest part in that specific subsystem is 6 years old. And then it goes up and up and up and up and up, and you have all these, like, kind of almost like revised versions of Hayden that eventually, like, come to the very top. And then you have, like, my day-to-day Hayden self, who doesn't really have as much understanding at all of what was happening so long ago, but is still affected by it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things that is important to get across here is, you said that your subsystems and the alters that are in there, they do act through you, but you don't know why you're acting the way you're acting, right?
Yeah.
You're driven basically as a program, right? It's a program. I have to do whatever this is, whether that's not eat,
yes,
or
isolate yourself,
self-harm,
serve other people, self-harm, whatever.
Right, whatever it might be. And so you basically, in order to process these traumas, you have to recognize first that your reaction to something is a program. You are programmatically doing something, because your whole life you thought that that's who you were. You just did these things. But then identifying, oh, the reason why I'm doing this behavior,
Hayden is doing it,
right,
or why
whoever,
Lena is doing it,
right, is because of a program, and and that's what really starts the deconstruction of okay, what trauma caused me to do this, and then you kind of go back
all the way back,
and you sit with them,
and
you try and communicate with them internally and externally via writing and speaking, and you kind of, and sometimes not successful, sometimes you are, and really kind of figuring out what it was that caused the trauma, and then, like you said, debunk the lies that were told to them, and kind of in a way parent them,
reparent them
the right way, right? Like you're basically saying, hey, this wasn't okay, these were lies, this is not how things actually are, and so you don't have to do this behavior.
You don't have to do this job anymore.
Right.
Because that was something he used. So yeah, I started to break the programs, and I'm still doing that, and that's where I'm going to wrap up for this episode.
Yeah, great job.
Thanks.